Good morning, everyone, and thanks for coming on the 10th day of the workshop. Um, since my laptop didn't quite work, okay, let's hope the presentation works because this was made on Windows on Mac, and now it's running on Mac. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the evolution of collective animal movement. So evolution has been the theme over the last 10 days. And one thing that is fundamentally different about what I am going to talk about, and of course other instructors last week did talk about this, that when it comes to collective animal movement, the fitness of an individual depends not only on its actions but also on what others are doing. So it is frequency dependent. The strategies and the fitness are frequency dependent. Do I have to speak up? The mic is still not working. Okay, I'll try to speak up. Okay, so you have to imagine a video here because the video wasn't transferred. So you have to imagine a spectacular video where animals are moving in extremely synchronous fashion and a predator is trying to chase them. And what is remarkable about these kind of, I'm sure you have all seen, some flocks of birds and some BBC videos showing collective movement. And what is remarkable about these patterns are that they are of course fascinating to pretty much any human. And from a scientific perspective, these are little creatures having local information and perhaps no knowledge of the global pattern they are producing. So this raises two very interesting questions. How do these local information and local interaction between organisms give rise to these spectacular patterns, together with the fact that why did natural selection select for these kind of collective behavior? And this collective behavior is widely relevant, widely prevalent across scales, across biological organization, from bacteria to insects to large mammals. And not only biologists, physicists, robotic scientists, computer scientists have been working on them for a long time. In fact, some of the earliest work on these systems were actually done by computer scientists and physicists, because they thought of these as statistical mechanics of living organisms, large collection of organisms which are not physical particles, but they are interacting like physical particles. And what are the properties of these biological systems? And so the focus of physicists' approach has been that how do these individual level interactions give rise to self-thought collective motion? Once again, you have to imagine a video of golden shiners, which are very nicely schooling here. And the question that there have many different approaches. I don't want to go into details of how people have tried to understand them. There are these individual based models, there are fluid dynamical descriptions, and they all give very interesting results. Now my focus is going to be, why do organisms show collective movement? So since this is a workshop on evolution, I thought this would be the most relevant thing to talk about. And so living in groups, forget the movement part for the time being. Living in groups has been studied for a long time. One of the famous papers is again by the Hamilton, who argued that living in groups is a selfish phenomenon. But what one might argue, one might naively say that living in groups will benefit. It's an optimal behavior. It benefits everyone in the group. But as I remarked just a while ago, these behaviors are frequency dependent. What I do will depend on the fitness of what I do will depend on what everybody else is doing. So I will get to that a bit more later. So we cannot argue that just because a certain behavior benefits the entire group doesn't necessarily mean the natural selection will favor it. So that's the key message. Therefore, we have to start from first principles. So in evolution, all that matters is relative fitness between individuals, even though the groups may or may not be optimal. We have to see whether they will be optimal. In a sense, the adaptation need not quite work here. Okay, so this is what I have been working for over last several years. We have worked on. Is there a pointer? How does this work? The top button. It's okay, no problem. I'll just touch my. So I have been working on this idea of the question of collective behavior and the evolutionary dynamics underlying it over last several years. And we have worked on migration and cannibalism. And today I'm going to focus mostly on the two topics that I have highlighted below: predation and altruism, and how can collective motion come under these scenarios, these selection pressures. Okay, so before I go into evolutionary part, I want to introduce you to a very simple model of collective animal movement. So how do we build a individual based microscopic model of collective animal movement? Okay, so here is a very simple model. We assume that these organisms move in, let's say, 2 or 3 dimensional space. To a large extent, we restrict ourselves to 2 dimensional space. And every individual has a position that is denoted by Ci at time t, and they have a direction of movement. That is the current state. Now, for the next time step, they have to update their state. In what direction are they going to move? That is what they have to figure out. So if two individuals are very, very close to one another, you can imagine that they want to avoid collision. Therefore, they have an avoidance behavior. They just bump off one another. They go in a direction opposite to each other. However, if they are within this relatively small zone around them, which we call zone of perception or zone of local social interactions, then I haven't drawn. I think that's not quite clearly appearing here. Imagine roughly comparable to their body size, not too much bigger than that. If there are other individuals in that zone, they tend to attract towards them. They tend to attract towards the center of mass of their neighbors, and they also go in the average direction of their neighbors. So these are two behaviors that every individual follows. And once we know these directions of motion for all the individuals, and every one of them takes the next step, and we assume constant speed for most of our simulations, and that just makes integration a little easy. And these are discrete. Basically, these are continuous space dynamics, discrete individuals, and discrete time simulations. Okay, and every individual, the key message here is every individual's movement depends on the local information available to them about the presence of others and their movement of others in the neighborhood. So, for example, let's see what happens. Now, I mentioned there are two local social interactions. One is attraction, the other is orientation. Okay, if the attraction is strong, you can imagine that they form groups, but as a group, they don't necessarily have a coherent motion. They are like swarm-like. They just jiggle around. In fact, the center of mass shows some sort of Brownian motion. If they have a high strength of orientation, they want to be aligned with their local neighbors. Then they form swarms, which are much bigger than their zones of perceptions, and the entire group picks a random motion in random direction in space, and they move coherently. Okay, the direction that the entire group picks is an emergent property. No individual exactly has an idea where to go, but because they're all following one another, and because they want to move in the direction of one another, the entire group picks a spontaneous direction. And there is an interesting parameter space where if we have certain balance of this attraction and orientation tendencies, the entire group actually starts moving in a shape of a donut, which is, I give this example as an example of a property, an emergent property, because no individual here has a tendency to go in circles, but as a group, they're all following similar local rules, but yet they show a dynamics which is not present in their movements, in their local dynamics at all. So in fact, does this actually happen in nature? In fact, we do find that many organisms do show such behaviors. Okay, so of course this was only to show you how we actually individually model these behaviors. Now I want to go to the question that I am interested in, which is why coordinated motion at all. And the basic idea is this. So I am assuming that in all these simulations, which people have been doing for the last 15 years or so, assume that individuals have exact same social tendencies. Everyone in this room, for example, will have some attraction and orientation tendencies. And we are basically going to relax that assumption. We say that those tendencies could be under selection. So I will show more precisely how we do this. Okay, and I want to go back to the idea of living in groups. As I mentioned, one of the very first ideas of why animals live in groups was proposed by Hamilton. He called this selfish head hypothesis. And the idea is that by herding with others, you reduce your domain of danger. You reduce the area around you by being with others. Therefore, if a predator were to come randomly in space, there is a less chance of it landing in your in an area where you are prone to. Whereas the simplest example is I'm standing away from all of you, and Mike Whitlock is again on the other extreme. We two are probably more prone to predation now than any of you sitting in the middle, because we have much lesser domains of danger. Therefore, what should I do? I should come close to one of you. That will reduce my domain of danger. If all of us do this, we actually end up forming a herd. Now, of course, we have to disregard the fact that from the point of view of predator, the entire group may be more conspicuous. That is irrelevant. All that matters to me is, am I doing better than the rest of my friends around me? Okay, so that leads to formation of groups. However, he did not really consider the movement and the dynamics at all. There was nothing about the coordination or the dynamics while he was doing this. It was all about just the group formation. So to understand this question, we devised a set of some very simple experiments, starting with the following fact. So we noticed that there are these bluegill sunfish, which are a freshwater species in North American waters. Oh, I could use this for okay, yeah, that works. And one thing very interesting is, if this was the real fish, if I were to shine a laser light of red color, these fish would think that, I mean, I don't know what they think, but they would actually have a tendency to go towards and suck those dots. And we thought this is probably because these red laser dots look like their prey, which are bloodworms and other species. So we used this as a so what we decided to do was, let us provide a stimulus to these real fish, and the stimulus comes from computer simulations. Okay, I will show you exactly what we do here. So we simulate prey. It's a very similar simulational, very similar computational model. So I told you I'm going to relax one condition. So in a typical physics-like model, all individuals in the swarm would have exactly same attraction and orientation tendencies. Here we know in biology that that's very, very variable. So we assume that different individuals in our simulations will have different attraction and orientation tendencies, and depending on them, you weigh whether you want to be attracted towards others, or do you want to orient your direction of motion with others. So every individual follows this dynamics of this dynamics. In addition, that they also have some randomness in their movement. So what we do is we take around 16 individuals, and as I said, they have different traits. 0, 0 means they are basically random walking individuals. So a very high value of attraction means this guy would want to attract towards neighbors, but doesn't care about the direction of neighbors. A guy with high alignment means that you want to align with your neighbors in terms of the movement direction, but you don't necessarily care about going towards towards the individuals. Okay, and of course you can also have balance of this. You have some weight towards attraction, some weight towards orientation. Okay, and what this means is that we have a variety of social interactions. When I say social interactions, local flocking interactions, entirely solitary, strongly aligning, strongly attracting, and of course the balance of this. And if we put all this together, what do we find? I hope, again, the video is missing. I'm really sorry about that. So what you see is, this is what the fish is seeing. This is what the bluegill sunfish is seeing. It sees that there are these groups that have been formed, and these groups actually jiggle around because they tend to be, most of them tend to be of very similar traits. And there are solitary individuals, and there are also groups which actually move in a polarized fashion. So what the fish sees is also a heterogeneity in terms of the different movement behaviors, different group behaviors as well. So now we show this to fish, and the fish, I'm looking at the tank in this direction. The depth of the tank is towards in the board, and it comes and attacks these dots, thinking they are its prey. And we can actually zoom in and actually point out who was attacked. See, the fish doesn't know the trait of these individuals in terms of the omegas that I have chosen. But since I am the one who is doing simulations, we know exactly the omega of this individual, right, who was attacked. Therefore, I know the risk of every trait in the triangle of social interactions. And we repeat the experiment several times to see, is there a pattern to it. And this is what we find. Oh, sorry. So size of the circle represents how many times these different individuals are attacked. So for example, the 0, 0 has a bigger circle, meaning this guy was really attacked most. And the ones what is very interesting here is the ones on having only attraction and only alignment have a much stronger tendency of being attacked, but the ones who had both have much lesser tendency of being attacked. What this showed us that what this really showed us was that when you have a heterogeneous population, by simulating a fish to attack a virtuous set of prey, we were able to show that these attraction and orientation tendencies which we model could actually be selected for. So this was one little work that combined the modeling and the real experimental work. This was done with Christos, who is currently in Bristol in UK, and Ian Cousin at Princeton. So recently, I've been continuing to work on similar issues. We got interested in altruism, and Jaideep Joshi, one of my students who is also in the audience today, he has done some very nice work on combining altruism and collective behavior. It actually very nicely relates to what Mike talked on Friday, which is that we need certain spatial structure for altruism to evolve. Okay, and I will show you whether I will talk about that a bit now. So let me just give you a brief, quick introduction. On most of you would know this. Altruism is extremely difficult to evolve. This is a standard prisoner's dilemma game, suited to altruism. If an altruist interacts with other altruists, you get a payoff of B minus C. But if you interact with a defector, you only pay a cost. You get no benefits. Whereas the defector gets all the benefits, and of course, both of you are being defectors means there is no payoff at all, which clearly means that under any circumstances, being a defector is the best strategy. Okay, so one general principle under which altruism can evolve is that when there is some sort of positive assortment. So what this equation tells you is that if the probability that an altruist meets an altruist, if that is more than the probability that the defector is meeting the altruist by a factor C over B, then there is a possibility of evolution of altruism. Okay, and there have been a lot of theories that have been proposed. This could happen because I interact with other altruists, preferably because they happen to be my kin, I know them. That would be one way. Other way would be reciprocity and limited dispersal, by dispersing within parents' neighborhood. And if you interact with your neighbors, then because you are interacting with your siblings, there is a higher chance of again interacting with kids. So these are the broad mechanisms that people have proposed. Recently, there has been other mechanisms that people have been thinking about. The question we are all interested in is, can altruism evolve even in the absence of all these three standard mechanisms? And obviously, as you can imagine, our interest is in spatial dynamics, because these animals which have these local forking interactions show really fascinating dynamics. Can they facilitate the kind of spatial structure that is required for the evolution of altruism? Okay, so let's start with a well-mixed group. Okay, a group that's huge, and just to make the point that just having a group doesn't really help in having altruism. For example, if you have a huge group, okay, these are the payoffs of an altruist and a defector. Altruist has a negative C. He has to pay a cost, even though there are many other altruists who are actually contributing to your fitness. Because you are also an altruist, you are paying an additional cost, whereas that the defectors don't pay. So in a well-mixed group, defectors will always do better than altruists. So just having a group doesn't work. Eventually, defectors will take over. That's what this diagram is indicating. However, altruistic can increase if there are many different groups under some conditions. And the broad idea is as follows, that we need to have sufficient variability in group compositions. And in addition, the fact that as the proportion of altruists within a group increases, the average fitness should increase. This is a consequence of the very simple equations I have already written there. But the question is, what is the mechanistic basis for this? How can we get to sufficient variability in group compositions? And in fact, what we can do is, using a formalism called Price equation, we can derive the following condition. This is a standard Hamilton's rule, where RB is greater than C, that's required for the evolution of altruism. It turns out that if R is greater than this number, which is effectively measuring the fact that if there are many different groups, they don't all have same proportion of altruists. Because they have very different proportion of altruists, although in every one of them the defectors on an average are doing well, under some conditions the entire at the population level the altruist can actually increase. Okay, so we need sufficient variability. The question we are asking is this variability possible within the framework of collect dynamic animal groups? Okay, and we do know that animals across taxa, they don't form a single large group. In fact, many results show that these group sizes could be exponentially distributed, maybe even fat tail distributions. There is a huge variation in the group sizes that actually occur. So motivated by this, we did simulations, and this is a snapshot from a simulation. So this is a snapshot where we have assumed that every individual has some movement, local flocking interactions, tendency to attract and orient. So even though they all have same phenotypes or traits, they form many different groups, and even though they have social traits, sometimes they can be solitary. And in fact, if I had the movie working, what you would see is that these groups are actually constantly merging and splitting with one another. And if you think about again the variability and the spatial sorting, you would think that all this group formation and mixing and splitting would actually make the system very well mixed, right? You would think that a lot of movement and mixing would make the system very well mixed. Surprisingly, what we find is that is not really true. Okay, so let me now go to the model that we have built, which is that it's a co-evolutionary model. There are two traits, a cooperation trait, altruism versus defection, and then local flocking interactions. Like in the previous experiment, the trait of being attracted towards and orienting with neighbors, that is evolvable. So we have an individual based model exactly the way we have said. So we just simplify the model a bit. We say every individual has an evolvable local flocking radius. To what extent you interact with your neighbors, that could be an evolvable trait. So an individual, it could be basically from 0 to any large value. That's possible. And we assume that, of course, having a very, very large value of RS, meaning I will interact not only with some people around me, but also to the end of the room, would mean that I'm paying more cost in the perception and the energetic costs involved in the interactions. In addition, of course, we have cooperation strategy. Whenever I'm moving around, there are points in time in the simulations when everyone can either be altruistic or be a defector. Okay, this again, this could change over generations. Okay, so how exactly do we implement them? So what we do is we start with some random initialization, like any individual is either randomly altruistic or defector. Any individual has some random value of social interactions or flocking interactions. Okay, and then we place them randomly in space, and they move according to the equations of motion, and at some point of time they have formed groups, and depending on which group do you belong to, you get your payoff. If you are in a group of size n with k altruists, and if you are an altruist, you get this payoff. Okay, and if you are a defector in a group size of n with k altruists, then your payoff will be kb over n. And as you can see, the payoff of an altruist is slightly lesser because of the cost associated with it. And both of them, depending on what is their value of RS, what is the extent of the social interactions, they also pay a cost of social interactions. And I want to emphasize that altruists and defectors need not have same value of RS. They could have different values of social interactions. You can imagine that a defector has a higher benefits by interacting with as many individuals because there is a higher chance of finding an altruist, right? So is true for altruists, but you can also get cheated though. So there are these very interesting trade-offs. And then based on the fitness, we do a selection, and then which is proportional to their fitness. And then based on the selection, we again randomly disperse them in space. So the important thing is we do a random dispersal. We don't put the offspring right next to the parent, in which case altruism evolves very, very easily. But the more challenging case is when the individuals disperse randomly. And typically, if you take a typical model of spatial movement, you would not find evolution of altruism with random dispersal at all. Okay, this is the results that we find. So as a function of cost to benefit ratio of altruism, the C over B in the prisoners dynamo matrix, what we find is this. Okay, I'm going to explain this. What we have written, y-axis is the proportion of altruists in the evolved population. So we repeat the algorithm until we reach some kind of a steady state, not really in equilibrium. And there are 3 lines here. I will explain what these mean. So these 2 are different baselines. Okay. So what is this baseline? So one baseline we consider is individuals are moving randomly in space. However, they do not have any local flocking interactions. So even if we don't have a flocking interactions, you can occasionally bump into each other and form groups, right? Just because of collisions. So even then there is a possibility of altruistic interactions, and that is this case. And this is another case where which I have already mentioned. When you have a strong flocking interaction which leads to a formation of a huge group, then this is how the proportion of altruists vary with the costs. So clearly this is really as expected 0. This is slightly above 0 for small values of cost because of drift and mutations which we incorporate in our models. Because in our models, when you do selection, there is a randomness that contributes to drift, and when offspring are born, they have a slight mutation rates. Because of this, even the baseline has a non-zero amount of altruists. But the most interesting part is this: when we let both the flocking and the altruism co-evolve, what we find is that the proportion of altruists are substantially higher. So why is this happening? So it is because of the variation in altruist composition in small groups. So as I said, the flocking interactions don't lead to one group. They lead to many different groups. They mix and merge. Okay, and not all groups will have same proportion of altruists. And in fact, they have small groups and big groups. And if you have a big group, on an average, their proportion is representative of the population proportion. But with small groups, there is a large fluctuations in how many altruists they have. And because of that, in fact, this is a plot of proportion of altruists in a group as a function of group size. As the group size increases, the variation in the composition reduces. So what is really contributing to evolution of altruism in our case is the small groups where there are huge fluctuations. So, and in fact, what we can show that this value, we can calculate this value of R by this expression, and we do find that the RB minus C as expected is greater than 0, but we have to verify that a bit more. So as I said, the positive assortment could happen in several ways that people have proposed: kin recognition, reciprocity, bit dispersal, and so on. So what we do find is that even in the absence of these 3, because of the spontaneous group formation that occurs in flocking systems, it could lead to conditions that are favorable for evolution of altruism. I think that's my last slide really. So with that, I would like to thank various collaborators and Jaideep who did the latter part of the work. And of course, thanks to all of you for coming on the last day of the workshop, which is very nice of you all. Thank you. I was hoping to show one more video. You just have to again imagine. Yeah. Same simulations, I could introduce, instead of having a random dispersal, I could have a limited dispersal. This line shoots up to 1. It's effectively fixation. Okay, so I think limited dispersal will be very strong. Huh? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So in a sense, it is not surprising that it actually goes down here, because I am really trying to eliminate all known mechanisms of altruism, right? So I am actually making, and you need spatial structure of some sort, and by putting them randomly at the beginning of every generation, and then the fact that they move so much in space, all makes them kind of kill the spatial structure. But nevertheless, these group formations that are a consequence of the local flocking interactions, those really generate the required, of course, it's still a coexistence. It's not really an entire fixation of altruism. Yeah. So okay, that's a great question. So the way we do is we have the time scale of altruistic interaction is just once per lifetime. That is to eliminate the possibility of repeated interactions. That's the only reason. Technically, I mean, if we somehow assume that doesn't happen, right? So we could have them spaced throughout, but we didn't do that for this reason. It confounds the time scale of what the mixing, and we can imagine if I were to do a lot of interactions throughout their movements, right? Then there's a lot of correlations. It could again become something like limited dispersal case. Whereas if I have the altruistic interactions, spaced out, then I'm killing the correlations of their spatial locations, right? So what we have done is it's a very different time scales the way we have implemented. There is only once a lifetime of altruistic interaction, and these happen several times over their lifetime that we have chosen. Uh, uh-huh. So see, the thing is, if you the point is that if you actually include any of the additional details, it only helps. It actually pushes this curve up, right? If you have more interactions per lifetime, this you're effectively incorporating effects of positive effects of limited dispersal. So this curve will only go up. So it doesn't negate the result; it only helps the results. Again, same with the inclusion of repeated interactions. It only pushes the curve up. It's a limit. In a sense, this is a limited. It's a extreme case scenario. Thanks.